The grand piano sat in the corner of Bellini's restaurant, its polished black surface gleaming under the soft chandelier lights. It was just after 5 in the evening, and Jenna Matthews paused for a moment to look at it before continuing with her work. Her fingers twitched slightly at her side, a small unconscious movement that happened whenever she saw a piano. 3 years of serving tables at this upscale Italian restaurant hadn't dulled that reflex. "Table 7 needs more bread," called out Raj, one of the other servers, as he rushed past with a tray of martinis. Jenna nodded and turned away from the piano. The Friday night dinner rush was beginning and she needed to focus. She straightened her black apron and tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear before heading to the kitchen. The weight of the order pad in her pocket and the comfortable squeeze of her worn-in work shoes grounded her in reality. This was her life now. The kitchen buzzed with activity. Steam billowed from pots of pasta water, and the head chef, Tony, barked orders with his usual intensity. The smell of garlic and fresh herbs filled the air as Jenna grabbed a basket and filled it with warm bread rolls. "Looking sharp tonight." "Jenna," said Kiko, the pastry chef, with a friendly wink as she piped delicate rosettes onto a row of tiramisu. "Big tippers coming in?" "Just the usual Friday crowd, I think," Jenna replied with a small smile. "Though I heard Mr. Davidson made a reservation for 8 people. Mr. Big Shot with his fancy friends." Kiko rolled her eyes. "At least he tips well." Jenna nodded, though she always felt uncomfortable around Davidson. He was the type who looked through servers rather than at them. As she carried the bread basket through the dining room, Jenna caught sight of the evening's pianist arriving. Hector was in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and fingers that seemed impossibly long. He nodded politely at her as he set his leather music folder on the piano bench. In about 30 minutes, he would begin playing the classical and jazz standards that Bellini's wealthy customers expected as the soundtrack to their $42 pasta dishes. Little did any of them know, not Hector, not her co-workers, not a single person in this restaurant, that the quiet server refilling water glasses had once been on track to play concert halls. That 5 years ago she'd been studying at Juilliard on a partial scholarship, her professors praising her exceptional emotional depth and remarkable technical precision. That had been before her mother's illness, before the medical bills, before the impossible choice between pursuing her art and helping her family survive. "Evening, Jenna," said Mrs. Finley, a regular who came in every Friday with her husband. The older woman had a kind face and always remembered Jenna's name. "How are you doing tonight, dear?" "I'm doing well, thank you for asking," Jenna replied, setting fresh bread on their table. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" This was the script of her life now. Pleasant, forgettable exchanges with people who saw her as nothing more than a function. Pour the water. Take the order. Deliver the food. Clear the plates. The rhythm of restaurant work had its own tempo, so different from the Chopin nocturnes and Bach preludes that still played in her head during quiet moments. By 7 o'clock, the restaurant was filled to capacity. Hector's piano playing blended with the hum of conversation and the clink of silverware against fine china. Jenna moved efficiently between her tables, her mind split between remembering orders and suppressing the urge to mentally analyze Hector's interpretation of Debussy. "Excuse me," called a woman from table 12, waving her hand impatiently. "This wine isn't what I ordered. I specifically asked for the 2015 Barolo, not the 2017. "I'm so sorry about that," Jenna said, taking back the wine. "I'll bring you the correct vintage right away." As she hurried to the wine storage, she overheard a conversation between 2 businessmen. "You know, my daughter's taking piano lessons," one said, gesturing toward Hector. "Her teacher says she's gifted, but honestly I can't tell the difference between good playing and great playing." "It's all about the training," his companion replied confidently. "These musicians, they start when they're practically babies. It's like programming a computer. Put in the hours and you get the results." Jenna bit her lip as she located the correct wine bottle. If only it were that simple. What these men didn't understand was that technical skill was just the beginning. True music required something more. A willingness to crack yourself, open and let your soul pour through your fingertips. She'd been 4 when she first touched a piano, an old upright her mother had bought second-hand. Her earliest memory was the wonder of pressing a key and creating sound, like magic appearing from nowhere. By 6, she could play simple Mozart pieces. By 12, she was performing Beethoven sonatas at regional competitions. By 17, she was being recruited by conservatories. The wine bottle felt cold in her hands as she returned to the dining room. Near the entrance, a large party was being seated. Mr. Davidson and his guests right on schedule. She recognized the local bank president and what looked like visiting business associates. Jenna called her manager Walter, a balding man with perpetually sweaty palms. "I need you to take the Davidson party too." Alicia called in sick. Her heart sank. She was already juggling 6 tables. "But Walter, no buts. These are important customers." His tone made it clear the discussion was over. As she approached Davidson's table, her gaze drifted again to the piano. Hector was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the pieces she'd performed for her Juilliard audition. She remembered how the admissions panel had leaned forward in their seats when she reached the middle section. How her professor had later told her, "You didn't play the notes. Jenna, you revealed them as if they were always there, waiting. Are you going to take our drink orders or just stand there daydreaming?" Davidson's sharp voice cut through her memory. "I'm sorry, sir. Yes, what can I get for you?" Jenna felt her cheeks flush as she pulled out her notepad. For the next hour, she raced between her tables, apologizing for delays, soothing impatient customers, and trying to keep track of complicated orders. In the kitchen, Tony was in a fouler mood than usual because one of his line cooks had cut himself and had to leave. "This is unacceptable," snapped a woman at table 5, pointing to her risotto. "This is supposed to be al dente. This is mush." "I'm very sorry," Jenna said, taking back the plate. "I'll have this redone right away." In the kitchen, Tony took one look at the returned risotto and exploded. "What is wrong with these people? This is perfect. These ignorant customers wouldn't know al dente if it bit them on their—" "Please, Tony," Jenna interrupted. "Just remake it a little firmer. Table 5 is with the Davidson party." Tony glared but began remaking the dish. Jenna leaned against the wall for a moment, closing her eyes. In her mind, she heard the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece she'd been working on when she had to leave school. "The piece she'd never get to perform. You okay?" asked Raj, pausing beside her with an empty tray. "Yeah, just a busy night." She opened her eyes and straightened up. "Better get back out there." As she returned to the dining room, she noticed Hector looking pale and dabbing at his forehead with a handkerchief between songs. When their eyes met, he gave her a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. Near the end of her shift, as she was serving dessert to the Finleys, a commotion at the piano caught everyone's attention. Hector had stopped playing mid-song and was clutching his wrist, his face contorted in pain. Walter rushed over, speaking in hushed tones. After a brief conversation, he helped Hector to his feet and guided him toward the office. As they passed Jenna, she heard Hector murmur, "Carpal tunnel flaring up. Can't continue." Walter shot her a desperate look. "Jenna, put on the recorded music playlist. Track 3. She nodded and moved to the small sound system hidden behind the piano after they had gone. As she switched on the recorded classical music, her hand hovered over the piano keys for just a moment, so close she could feel the cool ivory against her fingertips without actually touching it. How many nights had she stood just like this after closing, when the restaurant was empty? How many times had she almost allowed herself to play, to release the music that built up inside her like pressure in a sealed container? But always the shame held her back, shame of her failure, of her abandoned dreams of what might have been. "Is the piano player done for the night?" asked Mrs. Finley as Jenna returned to clear their dessert plates. "Yes, he wasn't feeling well," Jenna replied, carefully stacking the dishes. "That's too bad. It's just not the same with recorded music, is it? Something about watching human hands create those beautiful sounds." Jenna nodded politely, though something twisted in her chest. Human hands. Her hands. Hands that now carried plates instead of playing Rachmaninoff. As the night went on, she felt the weight of her secret growing heavier. Every time she passed the empty piano bench, it seemed to call to her. Every time the recorded music hit a phrase she would have interpreted differently, she felt a small internal flinch. None of them knew. None of them could see the music that lived inside her, that haunted her, that both comforted and tormented her. To everyone at Bellini's, she was just Jenna the server, reliable, efficient, forgettable, and maybe that's all she would ever be now. The next evening at Bellini's was even busier than usual. A local business magazine had just named it the city's best Italian restaurant. and curious diners were flooding in to see if it lived up to the hype. The wait for a table stretched to nearly 2 hours, and the kitchen was struggling to keep pace with orders. Hector called in sick, Walter announced during the pre-shift meeting, his forehead already shiny with stress sweat despite the evening having barely begun. His doctor ordered him to rest his wrist for at least a week. We'll use the recorded music again tonight. Jenna felt a twinge of sympathy for Hector. Carpal tunnel syndrome was a pianist's nightmare. She'd known fellow students who'd had their careers derailed by it. The thought crossed her mind that she could offer to play, but the idea vanished as quickly as it appeared. No one here knew about her past, and she preferred to keep it that way. The pity she would face if they knew she'd gone from Juilliard to serving plates would be unbearable. Jenna, you've got sections 2 and 3 tonight, Walter continued, handing out assignments, and Mr. Davidson called to increase his reservation from 6 to 12 people. A collective groan rose from the staff. Davidson was becoming a regular weekend customer, and his large parties were notoriously demanding. Hey, those big tabs mean big tips, Walter reminded them, though his own expression suggested he wasn't looking forward to it either. As the first customers began arriving, Jenna moved into the familiar rhythm of her work. Take orders, deliver food, check on tables, repeat. The recorded piano music playing through the speakers was pleasant enough, but several regular customers commented on Hector's absence. The live piano had become part of the Bellini's experience, the human element that elevated dinner to an occasion. It's like eating in an elevator with this background music, complained one elderly regular to Jenna as she refilled his water glass. I'm sorry, sir. Our pianist is unwell tonight, she explained for what felt like the 20th time. By 7:30, the restaurant was in full swing, a controlled chaos of movement and noise. Jenna was handling 10 tables, running between the dining room and kitchen with hardly a moment to catch her breath. And then Davidson arrived with his party, 12 people in expensive clothes already loud from pre-dinner drinks elsewhere. We'll need more space, Davidson declared, eyeing the table set for them. Push another table over. Walter scrambled to accommodate them, pulling Raj away from his section to help rearrange the furniture. This left Jenna covering part of Raj's section as well as her own. 16 tables now. She took a deep breath and plunged in. The first sign that the night was going off the rails came when a young child at table 9 knocked over a full glass of cranberry juice. The red liquid splashed across the white tablecloth and onto the mother's cream-colored dress. The woman leaped up with a cry of dismay, bumping into Jenna, who was carrying a tray of appetizers to Davidson's table. The tray tilted, sending calamari and bruschetta sliding dangerously close to the edge. Jenna managed barely to steady the tray, but not before a piece of garlic bread tumbled off and landed on the carpet. The near miss left her heart pounding. Careful there, Davidson called out, his voice carrying across the restaurant. Several heads turned to look. I'm very sorry for the delay, Jenna said as she finally set the appetizers on their table, trying to keep her voice steady. Well, we've only been waiting 20 minutes, remarked a woman with diamond earrings that caught the light when she tilted her head. I suppose that's not too terrible. It had been 12 minutes, actually. Jenna had kept track, but she smiled and nodded as if the customer's exaggeration was completely reasonable. Back in the kitchen, things were faring no better. Tony was in rare form, yelling at the line cooks for falling behind and sending back dishes that didn't meet his standards. This is garbage, he shouted, pushing a plate of risotto away. Are we a 5-star restaurant or a school cafeteria? Make it again. When Jenna approached with an order for a special dietary restriction, no garlic or onions, Tony looked at her as if she'd suggested cooking with mud. No garlic? In an Italian restaurant? He threw his hands up. Why don't they just go to McDonald's? Please, Tony, Jenna said quietly. Table 4 is a good customer. Fine, fine, he snapped. But don't come back in 5 minutes telling me they want no salt too. As Jenna pushed through the swinging door back into the dining room, she nearly collided with Raj, who looked harried. Your table 12 is asking for you, he said, something about the wine being too cold. And your table 3 has been waiting for their check for 10 minutes. I gave them their check, Jenna protested. Well, they're saying they never got it. The next hour blurred into a stream of complaints, special requests, and near disasters. The couple at table 6 sent back their pasta for being overcooked. A woman at table 10 claimed there was a hair in her soup. There wasn't, Jenna had checked discreetly. The Davidsons' table demanded fresh pepper on everything, then complained when the peppermill wasn't immediately available. Through it all, the recorded piano music played on, bland and inoffensive, occasionally skipping when someone bumped the sound system. Each time it happened, Jenna flinched slightly, as if the disruption in music was physically painful. During a brief lull, she ducked into the employee bathroom, leaned against the sink, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was flushed, her hair coming loose from its neat bun. She looked exactly like what she was, a harried server on a nightmare shift. Not a musician, not an artist, just another person barely staying afloat. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. 2 more hours. When she returned to the dining room, Walter intercepted her. "The kitchen's backed up 20 minutes on entrees," he said in a low voice. "Try to slow down the appetizer orders and push more wine." "I'll try, but Davidson's group is already asking about their main courses." Walter grimaced. "Do what you can." "Oh, and Mrs. Chen at table 2 says her steak is too rare, even though she ordered it rare. Can you deal with that?" The breaking point came at 8:47 p.m. Jenna was in the middle of taking a complicated order from a foretop of tourists when a sharp, impatient snapping sound cut through the air. Someone was snapping their fingers at her. She turned to see Davidson, his face flushed from too much wine, gesturing imperiously. "Server, we need more bread here. And where are our entrees? We've been waiting forever." "I'll be with you in just a moment, sir," Jenna replied, trying to finish writing down the tourist's order. "Now please," Davidson insisted, snapping his fingers again. The sound seemed to reverberate through Jenna's entire body. "I'm sorry, I just need to finish with—" "Look," Davidson cut her off, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I don't think that's too much to ask. People like you should at least be able to keep the bread coming. It's not exactly rocket science, is it?" The restaurant didn't exactly fall silent, but conversations nearby definitely quieted. Jenna felt her cheeks burning as she finished scribbling the last item on her notepad. "I'll bring your bread right away." "Sir?" she said, her voice barely audible. As she walked toward the kitchen, she heard one of Davidson's companions laugh and say something about the help these days. She pushed through the swinging door, placed the new order on the line, and went to the bread station. Her hands were shaking as she filled a basket with rolls. "You okay?" asked Kiko, who was piping decorations onto a row of cannoli. "You look like you're about to cry or kill someone." "I'm fine," Jenna said automatically, but she wasn't fine. Something was happening inside her chest, a pressure building like a dam about to break. 3 years of swallowed pride, of hiding her talent, of pretending to be less than she was. It was all rising up at once. As she re-entered the dining room with the bread basket, the recorded piano music skipped again, then began playing a mangled version of Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece she had once performed at a recital to a standing ovation. The distortion of the beautiful melody was like salt in an open wound. She delivered the bread to Davidson's table without meeting his eyes. "About time," he muttered, not bothering to thank her, and then everything seemed to happen at once. A server from another section bumped into her, apologizing hurriedly before rushing off. The Davidsons' wine glasses needed refilling. Table 3 was signaling for their check again. The food for Table 8 was coming up in the window. Someone called her name from across the room. Jenna stood perfectly still in the midst of the chaos, aware of a strange calm settling over her. The multiple demands faded to background noise as her gaze drifted toward the piano in the corner. The beautiful instrument sat unplayed, neglected except as a place for Walter to set the drink menus when the hostess station got crowded. The first notes that floated from the piano were tentative, like a question asked in a whisper. Jenna's fingers remembered the cool touch of ivory keys, so different from the warm ceramic of dinner plates she'd been carrying all night. The restaurant's recorded music still played from the speakers, creating an odd dissonance until someone, Jenna didn't see who, hurried to switch it off. Walter stood frozen halfway between the kitchen and the piano, his mouth slightly open. Several diners turned in their seats, confusion evident on their faces. This wasn't part of the Bellini's experience they had paid for, a server abandoning her duties to sit at the piano reserved for professionals. For a moment, Jenna hesitated. The weight of every eye in the restaurant pressed down on her. What was she doing? She could get fired. She should get up, apologize, return to her tables, and continue being invisible. Then her gaze fell on Davidson, who was staring at her with a mixture of shock and annoyance, his fingers still poised as if ready to snap at her again. Something hardened inside Jenna's chest. She closed her eyes and let her hands find their home on the keyboard. And then she began to play for real. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room, softly at first, then with growing confidence. The piece began simply enough, almost like a lullaby, but Jenna knew what was coming. This was one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire, a composition that started in gentle reflection, but built to a technical and emotional storm. The first 30 seconds passed in relative quiet. A few whispered conversations still continued. Someone at a back table laughed, unaware of what was happening, but as Jenna's right hand began the delicate crystalline melody that floated above the left hand's steady pulse, the restaurant began to still. Fork paused halfway to mouths. Waitstaff stood with trays suspended in mid-delivery. The bartender stopped polishing a glass, cloth still inside it. Even in the kitchen, the clatter of pots diminished as the staff edged closer to the swinging doors to peer out. Jenna felt the familiar sensation of disappearing into the music. Her body was just a vessel now, a channel for something larger than herself. Her fingers moved with confidence born from thousands of hours of practice that had not been erased by 3 years of disuse, but merely dormant, waiting. As the piece developed, so did its technical demands. Her hands crossed over each other, her fingers stretching to reach intervals that required precision and strength. The tempo increased and she rode the growing wave of intensity, her upper body swaying slightly with the rhythmic pulse. Through half-opened eyes, she caught glimpses of the room around her. Walter had backed away to stand against the wall, his earlier alarm replaced by wide-eyed wonder. Raj and the other servers had stopped all activity, clustered near the kitchen entrance. Davidson and his party sat in stunned silence, wine glasses forgotten in their hands. The middle section of the ballade arrived, the moment when Chopin's gentle introduction transformed into passionate declaration. Jenna's left hand thundered in octaves while her right hand danced in elaborate figures across the upper keys. The sound filled every corner of the restaurant, bouncing off the walls and chandeliers, vibrating in the wine glasses. A young woman at a table near the piano had tears streaming down her face, though she seemed unaware of them. An older man closed his eyes, his hand finding his wife's across their table. In that moment, there were no servers and customers, no social hierarchies, no Davidson with his finger-snapping entitlement. There was only the music and the people experiencing it together. Jenna's body moved with increasing animation as she approached the most difficult passage. Her shoulders rose and fell, her head tilted with particular phrases, her feet worked the pedals with subtle precision. This wasn't just playing notes on a page, this was storytelling, this was poetry. This was her soul finally speaking its native language after years of forced silence. The memory of her professors at Juilliard came back to her. Music isn't in the notes, they would say. It's in the spaces between the notes, in the choices of timing, of touch, of emphasis. She had understood this instinctively, even as a child. It wasn't enough to play the right keys in the right order. Anyone could be trained to do that. The magic came from the unique way each musician brought the printed notes to life. As she navigated the treacherous technical waters of the piece's climax, sweat began to bead on her forehead. Her fingers flew across the keys in dizzying patterns, but she never lost control. This had always been her gift, the ability to harness technical difficulty in service of emotional expression, not as an end in itself. In the kitchen, Tony the chef had stopped shouting. He stood in the doorway, wooden spoon still in hand, watching with his mouth slightly open. Kiko the pastry chef stood beside him, hands covered in flour, blinking rapidly as if to clear her vision. Near the back of the restaurant, the elderly Mrs. Finley clutched her husband's arm, whispering something in his ear. He nodded, his eyes never leaving Jenna. The piece raced toward its conclusion, a headlong rush of cascading notes, harmonic tension building to an almost unbearable degree before finally resolving in a series of thundering chords. Jenna's whole body was involved now, rising slightly from the bench during the most powerful moments, leaning in during the quieter passages as if sharing a secret with the piano. The final minute of the ballade was a test of endurance, technique, and emotion. Jenna's fingers maintained their precision even as they blurred with speed. The restaurant had become so silent that the mechanics of the piano were audible. The soft thump of the hammers, the whisper of the pedals, even Jenna's breathing as she poured every ounce of herself into the performance. And then came the final sequence, a series of descending notes that seemed to ask a question, followed by the answering chords that provided resolution, but not without a touch of melancholy. The last notes hung in the air, sustained by the pedal, gradually fading into silence. For 3 heartbeats, the restaurant remained completely still. Then someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." And suddenly the room erupted in applause, not the polite, measured applause of people acknowledging background entertainment, but the thunderous, passionate response of an audience that had been genuinely moved. Jenna opened her eyes fully, suddenly aware again of where she was and what she had done. The sound of clapping surrounded her from all sides. People were standing, first a few, then most of the restaurant. Someone whistled. Someone else shouted, "Bravo!" Her legs felt unsteady as she rose from the piano bench. Her face was flushed, partly from the physical exertion of the piece, but mostly from the rush of emotion. For 3 years, she had kept this part of herself locked away, and now it was out, exposed for everyone to see. Walter approached her, and for a moment she thought he was going to reprimand her, perhaps even fire her on the spot, but his eyes were wide with astonishment, and when he reached her, he simply shook his head in disbelief. "Jenna," he said, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. "What? How? Where did you learn to play like that?" She opened her mouth to answer, but found no words coming out. How could she explain what music meant to her? How it had been her voice, her refuge, her joy since childhood. How losing it had been like losing a limb. The applause showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it grew louder as the initial shock wore off, and the full impact of what they had witnessed sank in. Even the kitchen staff had emerged completely now. Tony in his sauce-splattered chef's coat standing beside the hostess in her sleek black dress, both clapping with equal enthusiasm. Jenna scanned the room, taking in the standing diners, the smiling faces, the few who were wiping away tears. Her gaze landed on Davidson's table. The man who had snapped his fingers at her sat motionless, his expression unreadable. The woman beside him was clapping harder than anyone, her diamond earrings catching the light as she nodded encouragingly at Jenna. And there, near the entrance, stood an elegant older woman Jenna didn't recognize. She wore a tailored burgundy suit and had a distinguished air about her. Unlike the others, she wasn't clapping wildly but watching Jenna with keen interest, her head tilted slightly as if making an assessment. Walter leaned closer to Jenna. "That's Eleanor Whitman," he whispered. "She's on the board of the City Symphony. She comes in once a month, usually on Thursdays." Jenna nodded numbly, unsure what to do with this information. The applause was finally beginning to fade. Though people remained standing, many now turning to their companions to discuss what they'd just experienced. I should get back to my tables," Jenna said, suddenly remembering her job. The very real possibility that she'd just thrown it away with her impulsive action. But Walter shook his head. "I think your serving duties are done for tonight." He glanced around the restaurant, then back at Jenna with something like awe in his eyes. Would you play something else?" Before she could answer, a voice called out from one of the tables. "Yes. Play something else." Others joined in, the request spreading through the restaurant like ripples in a pond. Jenna looked down at her hands, server's hands, pianist's hands, her hands, still trembling slightly from the release of emotions long suppressed. 3 years of silence had ended. Whatever came next, she couldn't go back to pretending to be less than she was. With a small, decisive nod, she turned and sat back down at the piano. This time there was no hesitation as her fingers found the keys. This time she was home. Jenna played for another 40 minutes, one piece flowing into the next. She chose music that spoke to different emotions. The triumph of a Beethoven sonata, the playfulness of a Gershwin prelude, the heartache of a Schubert impromptu. With each piece, her confidence grew, her body language becoming more expressive, her face more alive. The restaurant's normal rhythm had completely disappeared. Servers stood watching instead of delivering food. Customers let their meals grow cold, transfixed by the unexpected concert. Chef Tony had pulled up a chair near the kitchen door, his earlier fury forgotten. Even the busboys had stopped clearing tables, dish bins held loosely at their sides. When Jenna finally ended with a gentle Debussy piece, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. This time she stood and gave a small awkward bow, unused to being the center of attention after years of trying to blend into the background. As the clapping gradually subsided, reality began to seep back into the restaurant. Servers remembered their duties. Diners recalled their meals. The spell wasn't broken, but it was thinning around the edges. Walter approached Jenna again, this time with the elegant woman in the burgundy suit beside him. Up close, Jenna could see she was in her 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a neat bun and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Jenna, this is Eleanor Whitman," Walter said, his voice carrying a note of deference Jenna had never heard him use before. "She'd like to speak with you." "Your playing is extraordinary," Eleanor said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her gaze direct, particularly for someone who appears to have been hiding in plain sight as a server. "Thank you," Jenna replied, suddenly conscious of her wrinkled uniform shirt and the smudge of pasta sauce near her collar. "I used to play before." "Before what, if I may ask?" Eleanor's tone was gentle but persistent. Jenna hesitated. She hadn't talked about Juilliard in years. It hurt too much. But something about this night, about finally letting her music out, made the words come easier. "I was at Juilliard, on scholarship. But then my mom got sick, and the medical bills." She shrugged, the simple gesture conveying the collapse of a dream better than words could. "I had to drop out in my second year." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "And how long ago was this?" 3 years. 3 years, Eleanor repeated softly. "And you haven't played at all since then?" "Not really. Not like tonight." A small crowd had gathered around them, other customers drawn by curiosity or moved by Jenna's performance. Among them was Mrs. Finley, the kind regular who always remembered Jenna's name. "You've been serving us for 2 years, Mrs. Finley said, her voice tinged with something like betrayal. "Why didn't you ever mention you could play like that?" Before Jenna could answer, a young man pushed forward, holding up his phone. "I got the whole thing on video. Already has 2,000 views on TikTok, and I only posted it 10 minutes ago." Jenna blinked, the implications not fully registering. "You recorded me?" "Everyone did," the young man said, gesturing around. Indeed, Jenna now noticed dozens of phones throughout the restaurant. Many still pointed in her direction. "This is going viral for sure. Server reveals hidden talent. It's like a movie moment." Eleanor Whitman pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to Jenna. "I'm on the board of the City Symphony, but I also teach master classes at the conservatory. I'd like you to call me tomorrow. Talent like yours shouldn't be serving pasta. No offense to this lovely restaurant, Walter, who might have taken offense on any other night, merely nodded in agreement." A movement at the edge of the crowd caught Jenna's attention. Davidson was approaching, his expression unreadable. The restaurant grew quieter as people noticed him, perhaps remembering how he'd treated Jenna earlier. He stopped a few feet away, clearing his throat. "That was unexpected," he said. Coming from him, it almost sounded like a compliment. He paused, clearly uncomfortable, then added, "I didn't know." "Most people don't look past the uniform," Jenna replied quietly. Davidson had the grace to look embarrassed. "Well, I'm looking now, and I'm impressed." He glanced around at the watching crowd, then back at Jenna. "Your talents are clearly wasted here." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Jenna nodded, accepting it for what it was. More people were pressing forward now, wanting to talk to her, to tell her how moved they'd been, to ask where she'd studied, to wonder if she gave lessons. The attention was overwhelming after years of invisibility. "Let's move this to the bar area," Walter suggested, seeing Jenna's growing discomfort. People still need to finish their dinners. As they moved away from the piano, Jenna noticed Raj and the other servers scrambling to remember which tables needed what. Trying to get the restaurant back to its normal functioning, she felt a pang of guilt for disrupting everything. "I should help them," she said, gesturing toward her abandoned section. "Absolutely not," Walter said firmly. "Tonight you're our guest pianist, not a server. We'll manage." At the bar, Eleanor Whitman continued their conversation while others hovered nearby, hoping to speak with Jenna. "Tell me about your training before Juilliard," Eleanor said. As Jenna began recounting her early piano studies, she became aware of a buzz of activity around her phone. which she'd left in her apron pocket. Kiko approached with it, her eyes wide. "Your phone's blowing up," Kiko said, handing it to Jenna. "Like, seriously blowing up." Jenna glanced at the screen and froze. There were dozens of notifications, text messages, voicemails, social media alerts. A childhood friend had sent a message. "OMG, is this you?" with a link to a video. Her former piano teacher from home had somehow found her email address and written, "I always knew you'd find your way back to music." "The video's everywhere," Kiko explained. "People are sharing it like crazy." "You're trending, Jenna." "I don't understand," Jenna said, scrolling through the flood of notifications. "How did it spread so fast?" "That's how the internet works now," the young man with the TikTok said. He'd followed them to the bar, clearly enjoying his role in the unfolding story. "My post already has over 15,000 views, and it's only been, 30 minutes? And I'm seeing it reposted on other platforms too." Jenna looked up to find Eleanor watching her with a small smile. "Welcome to your new reality, my dear. Talent will out, as they say. The question is, what will you do with this moment?" It was a question Jenna wasn't prepared to answer. An hour ago, she'd been a server having a terrible night. Now people were looking at her as if she were someone important, someone with gifts, someone special. "I don't know," she admitted. "I never thought... I gave up on music. I had to. Had to and chose to are different things," Eleanor said gently. "Sometimes we tell ourselves a story about why we can't do something, and it becomes a cage of our own making." Jenna felt tears threatening again. The emotional roller coaster of the evening, from humiliation to triumph to this strange new attention, was overwhelming. She excused herself and headed for the employee restroom, needing a moment alone. In the hallway, she nearly ran into Chef Tony, who was returning to the kitchen after watching her perform. "So," he said. His usual gruffness softened. "All this time you could have been playing at Carnegie Hall, but instead you've been taking orders for my carbonara." "Life happens," Jenna replied with a small shrug. Tony shook his head. "You know what my grandmother used to say? Talent is given twice. Once when you receive it, and once when you find the courage to use it." He gave her an awkward pat on the shoulder. "Better late than never, kid." In the bathroom, Jenna splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed different somehow, standing straighter, eyes brighter. She looked like someone who had just remembered an essential truth about herself. Her phone buzzed again. Another notification. Someone had tagged her in a post that read, "When a server sits down at a piano and reminds us not to judge people by their jobs." Beautiful moment captured at Bellini's tonight. The door opened and Kiko peeked in.
"Hey, you okay?"
"Walter sent me to check on you. Also, there's a local news reporter outside asking if you'll talk to them. Apparently, someone called the station about the restaurant server with the hidden talent." Jenna took a deep breath. "A reporter? Already? Like I said, you're trending." Kiko came fully into the bathroom, letting the door close behind her. "Listen, whatever you decide to do next, we're all really proud of you. It's kind of amazing to see someone break out of their box like that." "I don't even know what my next step is," Jenna confessed. "Everything's happening so fast." "Well, for starters, you should probably talk to that Whitman lady. She seems pretty connected in the music world." Kiko grinned. "And maybe change your voicemail message, because a lot of people are trying to reach you." When they returned to the restaurant, the atmosphere had shifted again. Most diners had finished their meals, but instead of leaving, they lingered, as if hoping for an encore. Walter was at the host stand fielding phone calls. "The local news website already has a story up," he told Jenna. "And we've gotten 6 calls asking if the piano server will be playing tomorrow night." He looked both frazzled and delighted by this development. "I told them I certainly hope so." Eleanor Whitman was still waiting patiently at the bar. When she saw Jenna, she smiled. "Ah, there you are. I was beginning to worry you'd escaped out the back." "I considered it," Jenna admitted. "Well, I'm glad you didn't." Eleanor took a sip of her wine. "Now, as I was saying, I'd like to discuss some possibilities with you. The conservatory has a special scholarship for exceptional returning students, and the symphony has an emerging artist program that might be perfect." As Eleanor outlined potential opportunities, Jenna felt a strange mix of hope and fear. Was this really happening? Could she actually find her way back to music after all this time? Across the restaurant, she noticed Davidson getting ready to leave with his party. As he passed near the piano, he paused, looking at it thoughtfully, then at Jenna. He gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, before continuing toward the door. The simple gesture, respect from someone who had dismissed her just hours before, crystallized. Something for Jenna, tonight, hadn't just been about playing the piano again. It had been about being seen. Truly seen for who she was and what she could do. "Are you listening, Jenna?" Eleanor's voice broke into her thoughts. "Yes," Jenna said, turning back to Eleanor with newfound clarity in her eyes. "Yes, I'm ready to listen. And to play." 6 months had passed since the night Jenna sat down at the piano in Bellini's restaurant. 6 months that had transformed her life in ways she could never have imagined. The morning after her impromptu performance, she'd woken to find the video had been viewed over 2 million times. Local news stations had picked up the story, and by the end of the week it had spread to national outlets. Server's hidden talent stuns restaurant patrons. Became one of those heartwarming viral moments that seem to touch something in people. It reminds us not to judge a book by its cover, said one morning show host, introducing the segment about Jenna. How many people with extraordinary gifts do we pass by every day without knowing? Jenna had been overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Interview requests flooded in. Her social media accounts, previously used mainly to keep in touch with old friends, exploded with new followers. Complete strangers sent messages telling her how moved they'd been by her story, how it had inspired them to revisit abandoned dreams of their own. Eleanor Whitman had become Jenna's guide through this unexpected whirlwind. True to her word, she'd arranged an audition for the conservatory's special scholarship program. Jenna had practiced day and night, terrified that her skills had deteriorated too much during her 3-year hiatus. "You're being too hard on yourself," Eleanor had told her after listening to her practice. "Yes, there's rust, but the foundation is still strong. And you have something many technically perfect players lack: genuine emotional connection to the music." The audition had gone better than Jenna dared hope. The panel had listened intently, and when she finished, the head of the piano department had asked, "Why did you ever stop playing?" It was a question Jenna had been asking herself every day since that night at Bellini's. Now, on a crisp fall morning 6 months later, Jenna stood outside the conservatory building, taking a moment to appreciate how much had changed. She was a full-time student again, her tuition covered by the scholarship Eleanor had helped her secure. She practiced for hours each day, her fingers regaining their former dexterity, her musical instincts sharpening once more. "There she is," called a familiar voice. Raj was walking toward her, grinning widely with Kiko beside him. They were both dressed in nice clothes rather than their Bellini's uniforms. "You guys made it," Jenna said, giving them each a hug. "I wasn't sure if you'd be able to get the time off." "Are you kidding?" "We wouldn't miss your first official performance," Kiko said. "Besides, Walter practically pushed us out the door." "He's coming too, by the way. Said he'll meet us inside." "Along with half the restaurant staff," Raj added with a laugh. "Even Tony's closing the kitchen early to be here." Jenna felt a lump in her throat. Her former co-workers had been among her biggest supporters, cheering every step of her journey back to music. They'd covered her shifts when she needed time for auditions, helped her move to her new apartment closer to the conservatory, and never once made her feel guilty for leaving them short-staffed when she finally gave notice at Bellini's. "You all have been amazing," she said. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just play like you did that night," Kiko said simply. "That's all the thanks anyone needs." Inside the conservatory's recital hall, people were already filling the seats. This wasn't a huge venue. It held perhaps 300 people. But for Jenna, it represented a milestone. This was her first public performance as part of the conservatory's Emerging Artists series, a showcase Eleanor had insisted she was ready for. Backstage, Jenna peeked through the curtains. She spotted Walter near the middle of the hall, checking his watch and saving seats for the others from Bellini's. Several rows back sat Mrs. Finley and her husband, who had become regular attendees at Jenna's practice recitals. And there in the front row was Eleanor, elegant as always, reviewing the program notes. A movement at the back of the hall caught Jenna's eye. Someone was slipping in just as the lights began to dim. Even from a distance, she recognized Davidson. He'd come to Bellini's several times after that night, always requesting a table near the piano where Jenna had continued to play on weekend evenings while getting back into practice. He'd never exactly apologized for how he'd treated her, but his manner had changed completely. Respectful, almost deferential. 5 minutes, Ms. Matthews, the stage manager said, touching her lightly on the shoulder. Jenna nodded and retreated to the small preparation room. She sat at the upright piano there, not to play, but just to gather her thoughts. On the wall hung a framed copy of the program for tonight's recital, her name printed in elegant font, Jenna Matthews, piano, selections from Chopin, Debussy, and Rachmaninoff. Beside it was a framed photograph that Walter had given her as a going-away present from Bellini's, a shot taken by one of the customers on the night everything changed. In it, Jenna sat at the restaurant's piano, her eyes closed, completely absorbed in the music, unaware that she was being photographed, unaware that her life was about to transform. The door opened quietly and Eleanor slipped in. Just wanted to check on you before you go on. How are you feeling? Nervous, Jenna admitted, but good nervous. Like before the big competitions in high school, not like when I was afraid of being fired for abandoning my tables. Eleanor smiled. You know, when I first heard you play that night, I knew immediately you were special. But what's impressed me most is how hard you've worked these past months. Coming back after 3 years away isn't easy. I still can't believe I let myself stay away so long, Jenna said. Even after Mom got better and the worst of the bills were paid, I just couldn't face going back. It was like I was ashamed of having failed, so I punished myself by staying away from the thing I loved most. Well, you're back now, Eleanor said firmly, and tonight is just the beginning. The stage manager reappeared at the door. It's time, Ms. Matthews. Jenna stood, smoothing down the simple black dress she'd bought specially for this performance. As she followed the stage manager toward the stage, Eleanor called after her softly. Remember what I told you in our first lesson? Jenna turned back with a smile. Music isn't just in my hands. It's in my heart. Exactly. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Now go show them. Walking onto the stage felt both terrifying and right. The applause that greeted her was warm, encouraging. Jenna took her place at the grand piano, a magnificent instrument far superior to the one at Bellini's, and adjusted the bench. The lights were bright, making it difficult to see individual faces in the audience, but she knew they were there, her former co-workers, her new teachers, her growing circle of supporters, even the man who had once snapped his fingers at her. As the applause died down, Jenna took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. This time there was no hesitation, no moment of doubt. This time she knew exactly who she was and why she was here. She began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece that had played in distorted form through Bellini speakers just before she made the decision that changed everything. Under her hands it became what it was meant to be, a shimmering, moonlit landscape of sound, delicate yet profound. From there she moved to Chopin, playing not the ballad from that fateful night but a selection of his nocturnes, each one telling its own story of longing and beauty. She could feel the audience leaning in, breathing with her as she shaped each phrase. Finally, she arrived at the centerpiece of her program, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, arranged for solo piano. This was the piece she'd been working on when she had to leave Juilliard, the piece she'd never completed learning until now. Its technical challenges were enormous, but tonight, they felt conquerable. She surrendered to the music's sweeping emotion, her fingers finding each note with certainty even in the most difficult passages. When she struck the final chord, there was a moment of complete silence, that magical pause when an audience is so moved they forget to applaud. Then the hall erupted in a standing ovation. Jenna stood and bowed, her heart pounding with exhilaration. She had done it. Not just played well, but played with her whole self, holding nothing back. As she took a second bow, she caught sight of Eleanor in the front row, nodding with unmistakable pride. Walter and the Bellini's crew were on their feet, Kiko actually jumping up and down with excitement. Even Davidson was standing, his usual reserve replaced by genuine appreciation. Backstage after the performance, Jenna was surrounded by well-wishers. Her new classmates from the conservatory, her former co-workers, music lovers who had heard about her story and come to witness her official debut, all wanted to congratulate her. That was even better than at the restaurant, Raj said, giving her a quick hug. Much better, Jenna agreed. I've been practicing a bit since then. Walter pushed through the crowd to reach her, carrying a large bouquet of flowers. "These are from everyone at Bellini's," he said, handing them to her. "We're so proud of you, Jenna. Though I have to admit our weekend pianist just doesn't draw the crowds you did." Jenna laughed. "Maybe I could come back for a special appearance sometime." "We'd love that," Walter said. "But only if it fits with your new schedule. I hear it's getting pretty busy." He was right about that. Beyond her studies at the conservatory, Jenna had begun taking on a few piano students of her own. The viral video had led to opportunities she never expected, including an invitation to perform with the City Symphony in their upcoming season, part of a special program featuring local talent. As the crowd around her thinned, Eleanor appeared at her side. "Well done, my dear. Very well done indeed." She handed Jenna a business card. "The artistic director of the Boston Symphony was here tonight. He'd like to speak with you about a possible guest appearance next season." Jenna took the card with trembling fingers. "Boston? Really?" "Really." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Told you this was just the beginning." Later that night, after the celebration dinner with friends and the last congratulatory messages had been answered, Jenna returned to her small apartment. On her kitchen table sat a framed newspaper clipping, the first story about her that had appeared in the local paper the day after her Bellini's performance. Beside the article was a small, handwritten note that had arrived a week later, bearing a Florida postmark. It was from her mother, who had moved there to live with Jenna's aunt after her recovery. "I saw the video," the note read. "I always knew you'd find your way back to music. Some gifts are too precious to stay hidden forever. I'm so proud of who you are." Jenna sat at her keyboard, a modest digital piano that had been a gift from the staff at Bellini's when she left. It wasn't a grand concert instrument, but it was hers, and she treasured it. She played softly, not wanting to disturb her neighbors, just letting her fingers wander across the keys. 6 months ago, she had been a server too ashamed of her abandoned dreams to even touch a piano. Now she was a musician again, a student again, an artist reclaiming her voice. The journey ahead would have challenges. She knew that. There would be difficult pieces to master, competitive auditions to face, moments of doubt. But she also knew she would never again let shame or fear keep her from the music that lived inside her. Some gifts, as her mother had written, are too precious to stay hidden. And some spotlights, once you've found the courage to step into them, show you the path that was always meant to be yours. Without fully realizing what she was doing, Jenna set down her serving tray on an empty table. She untied her apron and folded it neatly, placing it beside the tray. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, she walked directly to the piano. She was vaguely aware of confused looks from nearby customers. From the corner of her eye, she saw Walter emerging from the kitchen, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm when he spotted her. "Jenna, what are you doing?" he called, starting to move toward her. But Jenna was already sliding onto the piano bench, her hands hovering above the keys as they had so many times before. Only this time she didn't pull back. This time there was no shame strong enough to stop her. 3 years of silence. 3 years of pretending to be someone else. 3 years of burying her gift. Enough. Her fingers touched the keys. And everything changed.